After a particularly disheartening day in my freshman year of high school, in which my arrogance had once again stirred up the insecurity of my classmates and driven them to acts of ill-concealed hostility, I came home and announced to my mother that I found high school a complete waste of time, that I was going to apply for early graduation, that I had my heart set on the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and that nothing was going to deter me. "Very good," my mother responded, slapping the kitchen table for emphasis. "But you'll need to get a job to cover expenses." And I couldn't agree with you more about high school, a wasteland of mediocrity. Besides which, I've always said that all boys between the ages of 15 and 25 should be incarcerated. Hey, today we're going to learn about Born with Teeth by Kate Mulgrew. Welcome to Billy's Books. Today we're going to read a memoir by Kate Mulgrew, Born with Teeth. You may recognize this face. This is Captain Janeway from the starship Voyager in the Star Trek franchise. She was the first female captain of a starship in the Star Trek franchise and probably on TV in general. I'm going to read you a short story. So this is in a nutshell, she's telling her life story, just a little bit of Star Trek and a lot of other things, a lot of family. She comes from an Irish-American family. Babies appeared with maddening regularity. The bassinet, to my horror, was constantly emptied of one baby and filled with another. This was a sleight of hand I simply could not grasp, and yet I was told sternly that this was my younger brother Joe, and to always rely on my older brother Tom, and to hold his newest one gently and quietly, because she was just an infant, and her name was Maggie. Maggie doesn't make it. You'll have to learn why in the book. So she had, her Irish-American parents were wild, beautiful, troublesome parents who liked to have a lot of fun. They were East Coasters in Iowa. East Coasters in Iowa means trouble. They at some point moved to a beautiful house out in the country, and even though they had a big sprawling estate, they were very hungry. I think it was the classic land-rich, money-poor situation for them. At one point, their mom told her, "You should be grateful. You were born in wedlock, you're an American citizen, and you live on dry land. Now go back outside and play." When she was young, she had a poetry recital, and it went pretty well. She made some nuns cry. Afterwards, her mom said, "You know, kitten, I watched you today, and it dawned on me that you can either be a mediocre poet or a great actress. Now, which do you think you'd rather be?" And she gave her a Shakespeare book, which, if you think about it, it's pretty clever because that's both acting and poetry. Clever. But once again, they had strange parents. The old distant Irish dad and the peculiar mom, who when Kate was 15, her mother asked her, Kate, to be her mother. I guess because our Kate here was more stable or grounded or something. It's really not clear. Anyway, her first big gig on TV was Ryan's Hope. She was on Ryan's Hope for several years. It was great. She also was the star of a failed TV show called Mrs. Columbo. It's unfortunate. So this book is a little bit about her career, and it's a lot about her career and how it conflicts with her family. So she's talking about, I think, Rip Torn, someone she worked with, and she refers to Roberto, one of her husbands. Rip's intensity flashed hot and cold, as did Roberto's. So it was a real roll of the dice when Roberto visited me on the set one night and I introduced the two men. In the role of Sharon Martin, the brave and long-suffering heroine, I had been shackled to a food cage in a defunct deep freezer by an enraged Artie Taggart. When I spotted Roberto, I was forced to call out the formalities while restrained. Rip, sitting near me on an apple box, was casually polishing an ice pick when I said, "Rip, that's my fiancé, Roberto Meucci. Roberto, this is Rip Torn." Roberto shouted back, "How do you do, Mr. Tear?" Torn, I corrected him. Tear, torn, who gives a shit? Roberto responded. He was getting a little tired of all of her going away and disappearing for a while doing acting gigs when she should be at his feet, or at least at his side being beautiful. So that frustrated him a little bit. At one point, she was like, "I gotta do this. I've got this play. I've got this play. It's gotta happen. It's really important to me." His response was, "Enough of this nonsense, but go and get it out of your system, amore." One last time. Even when she was engaged, she was still a little bit naughty with other men. She liked dangerous-looking men who often did not have a sense of humor. She does have a sense of humor, which, by the way, is an important aspect of this book. When she's got a very wry sense of humor. It's kind of dry, usually, but not always. But and sometimes she'll just drop in some really, really heavy thing about her life. Pretty intense stuff. And it's still got this wry description the whole time. Very interesting. She'll drop in one paragraph. She dropped in one paragraph earlier about one of her friends who was just like, "Oh, and by the way, she was raped as a child, da-da-da-da-da." But she said it in such a way that had this zazzy irony that hurt and also half laughed at the same time. It's an interesting read. It's a fine line she walks. She got pregnant out of wedlock when she was very young, and she gave that baby up to adoption, which broke her heart, and she spent decades feeling bad about that. Then she got married and had 2 kids, 2 boys. She says the second birth was tough. She had a C-section. She was going to have a C-section. Roberto said, "No, be strong!" And she did not have a C-section, and it worked out, luckily. While she describes things, she has a little bit of irony. She sometimes you can see both her self-analysis and denial built into like one paragraph. It's pretty interesting regarding her career and her life. Like at one point later on, when she's doing Star Trek, Star Trek hours were insane. It's like her hours were like, get up at 4 a.m, be at the studio by 5, have an 18-hour day, come home, learn the script for the next day, go to bed. 3 hours later, get up and do the same thing, and she did that forever. She lost weight! Who knew? And that's just the schedule, I guess, for them. And so she was away from her boys, who were like 9 and 10 years old, and they, when they finally had a big showing of the first episode, she was like, and they brought all the family and friends in to watch it. She brought the boys, and of course, and she was like, she thought that would impress them, because it was Star Trek and spaceships and all this stuff, and it would also show all the hard work that she did and explain why she wasn't around so much. But instead, they were not impressed. They made a scene and did spitballs at the screen and whined and complained, and she was like, "Shut up, shut up." And she was really embarrassed because all of her friends and co-workers were there, and they all acted like nothing was happening. And then afterwards, she was like, "It was a very quiet car ride home." And then they went to bed, and I sat and thought, are they really that mad at me? Are they really that mad at me? And then, but that's season 1, and she fulfilled her 7-year obligation for Star Trek. So she knew they were frustrated with it, but kept doing it. That's showbiz. Anyway, but she does have a sense of humor about it. So after Roberto, she eventually got separated with him, and then she had a brief, not a little too brief relationship with a guy named Tim Hagen, who she thought was her true love, and at one point he said rather smoothly, "I'd love to see what you look like when you're 80." I think that's pretty smooth. But then he had a lot of problems with his family. I guess he had daughters to take care of, and he wasn't actually divorced yet. So whatever. So and they'd set up these things, and he'd make her wait and not know if he was going to show up, and sometimes he'd show up late, and one time he never showed up at all, and she just wondered for months. And then a bunch of time later, she got this box of roses. I mean, like, I guess, yeah, a box of roses, a box of red roses, and it said, "Thank you for the best 49 days of my life," and that was it. No phone call, no explanation. And she was like, "Man, this guy's a coward, not speaking to me directly." And so that's pretty rough. Anyway, is Kate Mulgrew the same person as Catherine Janeway? I'm guessing not at the beginning, but I think the writers took to her and started making Janeway more like Mulgrew. For example, Kate Mulgrew is very much addicted to coffee, and it's part of her morning ritual. And as you may know, there's a lot of that going on in Star Trek. They have a whole bunch of coffee jokes all the time in Star Trek The Voyager for her. So, that's the book. My nutshell of the book is a lot of her life and a little bit of Star Trek. If you're looking for a lot of Star Trek, I don't know if this is the book. But if you like reading about actresses who have a sense of humor and do have interesting careers and wonder how they balance stuff, then it's worth reading. She does have a sense of humor. It's kind of a period piece. What was life like in the 70s and 80s and 90s? Well, for actresses, you can see how it changes too. She had some pretty bad things happen to her and some pretty good things happen to her. I'm not going to tell you the bad things. They're bad. But she's a survivor. So yeah. If you can't do, review. What you gonna do when the satellites drop, when the satellites